Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Office of Tax Appeals. My name is Judge Tommy Leung, and along with me today on the panel are Judges Amanda Fasik and Andrew Wong. Although I am the lead ALJ for today's meeting, Judges Fasik and Wong and I will be equal participants in making the decision for this appeal. A few more housekeeping things to take care of. There's a transcript being prepared verbatim for this hearing. Our stenographer is Lynn Alonzo. For purposes of the transcript, we ask that everyone speak in a clear voice at normal speed and not talk over each other. Best practice is to mute your mics when not speaking. During the pre-hearing conference, we had discussed exhibits, and for FTB, exhibits A through O for the 2020 tax year, and no, actually exhibits A through N as in Nancy for the 2020 tax year, and exhibits A through OO for the 2017, 2018, 2019 tax years are all admitted into evidence. For Ms. Williams, her exhibits 1 and 2 are admitted into evidence. Exhibits 3 through 7 were objected to by the Franchise Tax Board, which I overruled, and the objections were based on relevancy. Mr. Brown, do you have a continuing objection to Ms. Williams' exhibits 3 through 7?
Yes, we do, Judge.
Okay, we'll go through that when we go on the record. After the pre-hearing conference, Franchise Tax Board submitted exhibits O and P, as in Peter, for the 2020 tax year, and exhibits, let's see, that would be PP, as in Peter, through UU, as in Uncle, for 2017, 2018, 2019 tax years. Those are basically exhibits regarding the frivolous return and frivolous submission penalties. Ms. Williams, do you have any objections to FTB's exhibits?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Okay, so I will omit exhibits O and P for the 2020 tax year, and exhibits PP through UU for the 2017, 2018, 2019 tax years. And for Ms. Williams, after the pre-hearing conference, she's sent in, we'll call it Exhibit 8, basically her witness, Mr. Denning's tax returns and explanations as to what happened. Mr. Brown, I imagine you have an objection to those exhibits also?
Only insofar as they are under our previously stated objection.
Okay, we'll go through that when we start when we go on the record. With that, I will get ready to go on the record in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see now. Good morning. Welcome to the Office of Tax Appeals. This is the appeal of Williams for 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Docket numbers are as follows: 2202964, 220510484, and 221011637. Prior to today's hearing, today is September 19th, 2020, approximately 9:40 a.m. Exhibits, the parties agreed to admit into evidence exhibits for the Franchise Tax Board for the 2020 tax years, exhibits A through P as in Peter, and for 2017, 2018, 2019 exhibits A through UU for those 2017, 18, 19 tax years. And for Ms. Williams, exhibits 1 and 2 are admitted into evidence also. Franchise Tax Board has objections to appellant exhibits 3 through 8. Mr. Brown, please state your objections.
The objections that or the exhibits that we object to in the testimony is that they're not relevant. And FTB submitted a written objection stating the grounds for that objection. And essentially it's that all of the tax years, or every tax year, stands on its own. What occurs with one taxpayer or from one tax year to another is it is separate from each other, as is the tax liability of another taxpayer stands on its own. That's the basis of our objection.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I'm going to continue what I ruled in the pre-hearing conference. I'm going to allow these exhibits to be entered into evidence. We can just, we, the panel, can determine whether it's relevant or not. We do know that these exhibits are a major part of Ms. Williams' appeal. To reject them at this point is basically to leave Ms. Williams without much of an appeal. So we think we should let those exhibits in. Of course, you, Franchise Tax Board, are free to argue relevancy again, argue on substance for those exhibits also. But as far as this panel is concerned, these exhibits are coming in as evidence and they will be made part of the record. So exhibits 3 through 8 are being admitted into evidence. Also, as discussed in the pre-hearing conference, the parties have agreed to hold this hearing electronically. And the parties also agreed that there's a witness to this meeting, Mr. Denning. Mr. Denning's tax returns are in the record. We also have, for today's hearing, time for Ms. Williams to present is total of 20 minutes, and time for Franchise Tax Board is 10 minutes. Before we start, Ms. Williams, with you and Mr. Denning, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Mr. Denning, are you there?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, sir. Would you both please raise your right hands and do you both swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Ms. Williams?
I do, Your Honor.
Mr. Denning?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Denning, I'm sure you realize that your tax records are in the record, and if this is a public hearing, do you waive your confidentiality to those tax records?
Yes, I do.
And you are willing to answer questions from either the Franchise Tax Board or this panel regarding your tax returns for 2017 through 2020?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Franchise Tax Board, you please introduce yourselves.
I'm Eric Brown, attorney with Franchise Tax Board.
Good morning.
Adam Seuss, attorney supervisor with the Franchise Tax Board.
Good morning, Mr. Seuss. Okay, I think after that long-winded introduction, Ms. Williams, we are ready for your presentation and you have 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. I would like to start by saying this is my response to the issues presented by the Franchise Tax Board. The respondents' tax and penalty assessments are based on the fact that they claim that no valid returns were filed for the years in question. Respondent uses this justification as the basis to propose tax assessment and frivolous penalties. The returns I filed meet all of the requirements of a valid return as determined by the IRS. As further verification of this, the IRS has accepted and processed all of the federal returns I have filed for the years 2017 through 2020. As per the response brief I filed in response to the respondent's brief, I prepared my California returns following the instructions on the form to enter my total wages from the federal form W-2 box 16. My returns for 2017, 2018, and 2019 tax returns meet all of the requirements of the law. The IRS has accepted my federal returns for 2017, 18, 19, and 20, process them correctly and accordingly. My prepared tax filings and sworn testimony are the basis for the assessment of taxes. Respondent incorrectly states that W-2 third-party information returns are a basis for assessment of taxes. The erroneous third-party W-2 information that the respondent references is bad payer data as described in the Internal Revenue Manual, Part 4.2.1.242. Quote, non-taxable income reported as taxable, unquote. The courts are considered that information returns allegations are never sufficient in and of themselves as an evidentiary basis for determining the existence or correctness of deficiencies or liabilities. The Internal Revenue Code makes it clear that forms W-2 and 1099 is not the final word on what a, quote, taxpayer's, unquote, taxable income is, as provided in 26 U.S.C. 6201D. And that states, in any court proceeding, if a taxpayer asserts a reasonable dispute with respect to any item reported on an information return by a third party, the IRS shall have the burden of producing reasonable and probative information concerning such deficiency in addition to such information return, unquote. The IRS states that per OCC Memorandum Exhibit 1, as even a return containing 0 for all entries except amounts withheld, the amount of the overpayment and the amount to be refunded is not invalid by reason of that pattern or content of entries. Such a return only qualifies as invalid when accompanied with tax protester type arguments, unquote. By definition, a, quote, tax protester argument, unquote, is a declaration of disagreement with the tax. Such a declaration expresses or implies something to the effect of, quote, I believe this tax applies to my earnings or the activity that produced them per the law as written, but I don't think it should, unquote. My return states the exact opposite, expressing or implying, quote, I don't believe this tax applies to my earnings or the activity that produced them, per the IRS's own Office of Chief Counsel summary. Quote, such a return, even one containing 0 for all entries except amounts withheld, the amount of the overpayment and the amount to be refunded cannot be legitimately declared invalid. Such a return only qualifies as invalid when, quote, accompanied with tax protester type arguments, unquote. If a tax officer or anyone else declares something to the effect of, quote, taxpayer argues that his wages are not income, when that was really said was that was that my earnings are not, quote, wages, unquote, and that is the other side's burden to prove the contrary if it can. This is a flat-out admission that not all earnings are, quote, wages, and by the extension that any earnings whose alleged, quote, wage status has been formally disputed must be proven to be in that special subclass. So regarding the FTB's assessment of frivolous tax returns and submissions, the FTB has not established a legal basis nor proof as to why my returns are frivolous as required by law. The same applies for frivolous submission as per 26 U.S.C. 6702, frivolous tax submission. The burden of proof, the appellate is not required to establish the burden of proof. The tax code is specific as per the burden of proof is on the respondent, and the respondent has no proof. The burden of proof, California Revenue and Tax Code 19180, states that in any proceeding involving the issue of whether or not any person is liable for a penalty under Section 191.77, 191.78, 191.79. The burden of proof with respect to that issue shall be on the Franchise Tax Board. 26 USD 6201, assessment authority required reasonable verification of information returns. In any court proceeding, if a tax asserts a reasonable dispute with respect to any item of income reported on an information filed return with the Secretary under subpart B or C of Part 3 of subchapter A of Chapter 61 by a third party, and the taxpayer has fully cooperated with the Secretary, including providing within a reasonable time period, access to an inspection of all witnesses, information, and documents within the control of the taxpayer as reasonably requested by the Secretary. The Secretary shall have the burden of producing reasonable and probative information concerning such deficiency in addition to such information return. So the burden shifts where taxpayer produces credible evidence. If in any court a taxpayer introduces credible evidence with respect to a factual issue relevant to ascertaining the liability of the taxpayer for any tax imposed by subtitle A or B, the Secretary shall have the burden of proof with respect to such issue, and no proof has ever been provided. I rebutted all of the erroneous, quote, taxpayer issued, unquote, W-2 and 1099 forms and attached corrected forms to my state filed return. As per law, W-2s are explicitly confined to reports of only statutory defined, quote, wages and payments, and reports on the forms of payment which really don't qualify as such, quote, wages, are therefore erroneous. A declaration of payment of, quote, wages on a W-2 is never sufficient in and of itself to establish that, quote, wages have actually been paid, no matter what else is on the form is true in fact or is presumed true. Similarly, nothing one says implies or allows to be presumed about oneself establishes or even supports an allegation that, quote, wages have been paid or received other than an outright acknowledgement. And, quote, information return, unquote, is never more than a collection of allegations requiring additional fact evidence to support them, unless acknowledged either affirmatively or by default. Nothing on them can be taken as true, quote, as a matter of law, unquote, no matter who produces them or about who they are produced. And nothing on them becomes true, quote, as a matter of law, unquote, no matter how they are refuted. Every single thing on them or about which they report is capable of being completely wrong or done in error, such as a withholding, no matter what else is actually true or presumed true. No 6020B return has ever filed by the FTB and signed under penalty or perjury as required to prove taxable receipts and assess the tax. The statute code at 26 UCSC 6020B imposes a mandate on the federal government to create a return of its own and on its own behalf, which it actually has legal grounds for believing someone has had taxable receipts contrary to what appears on his or her filed return. Or
Ms.
when
Williams,
a return is yes.
Just to let you know, you've used up 10 of your 20 minutes. And
Okay, I'm almost finished, sir.
just letting you know that. So just to remind everybody that the issues in this case are whether FTB's proposed assessments are an error. Then there are three penalties: the late filing penalty, the demand penalty, and the frivolous return and submission penalty. So you've gone through the the frivolous penalties. So you've still got the other two penalties to go through, and you're basically going through the proposed assessment. Just to know where you are. So go ahead. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt.
Okay, it's okay.
Okay.
Okay. The when it actually had, oh, I'm so sorry. 26 CFR 301-6020B, execution of returns. In general, if any person required by the Internal Revenue Code or by the regulations to make a return fails to make such return at the time prescribed therefore, or makes willfully or otherwise a false, fraudulent, or frivolous return, the commissioner or other authorized Internal Revenue Officer employee shall make such return from his or his own knowledge and from such information as he can obtain through testimony or otherwise. Pursuant to these rules, then, the law plainly states that the government is obligated to make a sworn 6020B return on its own behalf by the hand of its agent, and if it believes it has a legal basis or authority for alleging that a person has had an amount of, quote, income sufficient, unquote, sufficient to require a return, and which is contrary to what appears on a return that person may have already filed. Additional credible evidence, the witness will testify that he and his wife submitted 0 California state tax returns in the exact same format that I have provided. Their returns were processed without question and refunds were issued to them. This is further proof that the FTB has accepted and processed 0 returns. I'd like to have my witness testify at this point.
Yes, please.
Okay. David, would you please speak for the record regarding your California state tax returns, copies for 2017 through 2020 that were introduced into evidence?
Yes, certainly. My wife and I filed 0 tax returns based on the rebuttal of incorrect W-2 and 1099s furnished to the tax agencies by payers on California 3525 forms. We submitted with our returns, which included language that we received no wages as defined by law, or in the case of 1099Rs, that the distribution is my source of capital, and that the capital does not qualify as wages. And any payment made by any institution was from money that is capital, not income. So that covered the issue as far as rebutting W-2s and 1099s in our tax forms. The state of California accepted these returns as valid returns and subsequently processed them and issued refunds for overpayments. So if there isn't anything else, you know, I've stated the factual evidence, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Denning. This concludes the witness testimony and my testimony.
Okay. For the record, you have 6 minutes left. I'll reserve that for your closing. Before you begin your presentation, Mr. Brown, do you have any questions for either Ms. Williams or Mr. Denning?
I have no questions, Your Honor.
Okay. To my co-panelists, Judge Fasiq, any questions for either Ms. Denning, or Mr. Denning or Ms. Williams?
I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Judge Wong?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, please begin your presentation. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Eric Brown, attorney with the Franchise Tax Board. Also representing the Franchise Tax Board is Adam Sues. This appeal involves deficiency assessments for tax years 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Appellant has failed to show error in any of the proposed assessments of additional tax. Appellant has also failed to establish reasonable cause to abate the delinquent penalty and demand penalty for any tax year in issue. Before proceeding with my presentation, I wish to address 2 threshold matters in this appeal. First, respondent note from the pre-hearing conference minutes and orders that issue number 4 is whether the 2017 through 2020 frivolous return and frivolous submission penalties should be waived. As a threshold matter, respondent objects to inclusion of this issue in the present appeal on grounds that the OTA lacks subject matter jurisdiction to consider frivolous return penalties and frivolous submission penalties imposed under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 19179. The prepayment review process for frivolous return penalties and frivolous submission penalties is by way of petitioning the Chief Counsel of the Franchise Tax Board for relief pursuant to Section 19179, Subdivision E. Otherwise, since Section 19180B specifically exempt frivolous return and frivolous submission penalties from taxpayer protest and appeals processes, the
Mr.
only
Brown,
way the
Mr. Brown,
yes,
we just lost you for about the last sentence. I guess your audio sort of skipped the beat. So could you start from
I'm
like
sorry,
one
can you hear me
sentence
now?
earlier? Yeah.
Okay. I'll just repeat because I don't know where it stopped.
Okay.
The prepayment review process for frivolous return penalties and frivolous submission penalties is by way of petitioning the Chief Counsel of the Franchise Tax Board for relief pursuant to Section 19179, Subdivision E. Otherwise, since Section 19180B specifically exempts frivolous return and frivolous submission penalties from taxpayer protest and appeals processes, the only way the OTA would have jurisdiction would be if appellant were to pay the penalties, claim a refund, have the claim for refund denied, and then appeal the denial. However, none of those threshold steps have been taken in the present appeal to confer jurisdiction over respondent's imposition of the frivolous return penalty or the frivolous submission penalty for any tax year in question. In footnote 2 from its 2018 precedential opinion of Appeal of Eleanor Balch, the OTA clarified its lack of authority to consider frivolous return penalties imposed under Section 19179 in no uncertain terms, stating, quote, OTA has no authority to review frivolous return penalties imposed under Section 19179. Finally, the burden of proof under Section 1980 sub A, to which appellant referred, pertains only to proceedings involving the penalties under Sections 19177, 19178, and 179, and not to any other proceedings such as appellant's burden to prove error in respondent's proposed assessments of tax. Again, OTA has no authority to consider penalties imposed under Section 19179 in the present appeal. In the present appeal. Second, as another threshold matter, respondent objects to the witness testimony of appellant's witness and to the documents purporting to support the witness's testimony. Even if true, the testimony and documentary evidence has no relevance to appellant's appeal for any tax year. It is a well-settled tax law principle that each tax year stands on its own. Tax liabilities of one tax year are separate from the tax liabilities of another year, and the tax liabilities of one taxpayer are separate from the tax liabilities of another taxpayer. Respondent submitted its written objection, explaining its reason underlying the objection, and respondent respectfully requests for the OTA to sustain its objection. With those threshold matters having been raised, I will now proceed with respondent's presentation. Appellant filed tax returns for each year in which she reported zero wages, zero taxable income, and zero tax, while accurately reporting California income tax withheld and claiming a refund for each year in the amount of tax withheld. Attached to each return were FTB Forms 3525, which is a substitute for IRS Forms W-2 and 1099 when those forms are lost, were not issued, or are unavailable. In each Form 3525, appellant reported that her employer, whom she refers to as payer, issued or erred by issuing W-2s because money she received from her employers was supposedly not wages within the meaning of the Internal Revenue Code. Appellant's position regarding non-taxability of wage income has long been deemed as frivolous and has been consistently and emphatically rejected by the IRS, respondent, the courts, the Office of Tax Appeal, and its predecessor, the Board of Equalization. Our briefs support this. For each year, respondent sent a notice of proposed assessment proposing additional tax and also proposing applicable penalties. In response to the NPAs, appellant protested and once again asserted her frivolous positions. Respondent rejected appellant's arguments, denied her protests, and affirmed its proposed assessments. On appeal, appellant continues to assert her frivolous position that her wage income is not taxable. In the OTA's 2018 previously mentioned precedential opinion in appeal of Eleanor Balch, appellant made the same frivolous argument about wage income as appellant is making in the present appeal. The OTA and Balch rejected appellant's argument and reaffirmed that wage income is indeed taxable. The OTA also reaffirmed that the argument that wage income is somehow not taxable is frivolous and without merit. Appellant has failed to establish reasonable cause to abate the delinquent penalty or the demand penalty. In the OTA's 2021 precedential opinion of appeal of S. Reed, the OTA reaffirmed that zero returns, such as the ones appellant filed for each year in the present appeal, are not valid returns under the law and do not constitute the filing of a return at all for tax law purposes. Accordingly, since appellant has not filed a valid return for any tax year at issue, the law deems that she has not filed a tax return at all for these years, and so respondent's proposed assessment for each year includes a delinquent penalty. Appellant has likewise failed to make any argument about the delinquent penalty or about the demand penalty at all, let alone about reasonable cause to abate the penalties. Because appellant has failed to make any argument, she has failed to meet her burden to prove the existence of reasonable cause to abate the penalties. In view of the above, respondent respectfully requests for the OTA to sustain the FTB's action. I would be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Judge Fasik, any questions for the Franchise Tax Board?
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Wong, any questions for the Franchise Tax Board?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, you have 6 minutes remaining for any rebuttals that you might have.
Okay. So I'd like to conclude with the summary, The returns that I filed are filled out correctly and unaltered and signed under penalties of perjury. As a result, my filed returns meet the requirements of a valid return. The respondent has produced no evidence to the contrary other than to say I had taxable income based on erroneous information returns provided by payers as justification as such. On the contrary, the appellant has produced credible evidence that the returns filed are valid, and therefore there is no basis in law for the assessment of additional taxes and penalties. The justification the FTB uses to cite, quote, invalid returns, unquote, and assessment of taxes and penalties is bogus and baseless in law. Furthermore, no basis in law exists for the FTB's contention that I owe taxes or penalties based on my earnings not defined as, quote, wages, unquote, and thus subject to the income tax. In addition, there is precedent for the approval and processing of zero income tax returns in the state of California as testified by the witness. I therefore demand that all taxes and penalties for the associated tax return years be immediately rescinded and that my returns for the 2017 through 2020 tax years be processed accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Judge Fasik, any questions for either party?
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Wong?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. I do have some questions. Ms. Williams, do you and Mr. Denning work for the same employer?
I'm sorry, Judge, can you repeat that?
Yes,
Please?
do you and Mr. Denning work for the same employer?
No, we do not.
Okay. Mr. Denning, I noticed in the FTBs, when they granted your refund, it states on their notice that it was being granted based on a math error. So was your refund claim based on a math error or based on the amounts you received were not wages or capital? Mr. Denning, are you there?
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
I believe it was just a computational error.
So it's a computational
it-
error. Sort of.
Yeah,
but-
it had nothing to do with the fact that it was a zero return that was approved by the FTB. It just had to do with, I think, one or two of the figures that were identified on the tax return. I don't remember specifically.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Brown, can you help out here? Looks like from exhibits 3 through 7 for each of Mr. Denning's tax years that the refund claims were granted based on math error. Is that correct?
If that's what the document says, Judge, then that's what the document says. I'm not prepared to discuss the substance of that, of why it was treated the way it was treated.
Well, that's why we asked Mr. Denning to offer a waiver of confidentiality so you can openly discuss it. So based on that document, the refund claim was not granted because he didn't have any income. It is because there are some math errors in there.
No, it was due to the fact that it was determined that I had no income. But the calculation of that, I think, was done in error, and it was rectified.
Huh. Okay.
Can you tell me? Can you tell me for what year you're referring to? What tax year?
I think from Ms. Williams' exhibits 3 through 7, it's got notices to you, Mr. Denning, granting the refund. I think they all say math error.
Okay, well, I'm looking at Exhibit 5 here for the 2017 tax year,
Yeah.
and it says we changed your 2017 tax return, which resulted in a refund of $5,239. You should receive your refund within 10 days of this notice. So I don't see anything about a math. Oh, you made a math error when you calculated your California adjusted gross income, or explanation of changes. I'm not sure what that math error is. I'd have to go back to the tax return to see what that was. So what I have under Exhibit 5, there was a 2017 tax year account balance summary. And on that, it lists what the FTB's calculation is under our calculation.
Mm-hmm.
It says taxable income 0. Exemptions were 228. Interest allowed 537 and 39 cents. Had a total withholding of 7,966. There was a refund previously issued of $33,303 and a revised refund of 5,239 cents. So I think that's what they're referring to as far as I'm out there.
Okay.
It was just a calculation of what the final refund amount was.
Okay.
But in all instances, it was admitted that we had 0 taxable income.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Denning. Mr. Brown, Ms. Williams testified that the IRS accepted her federal return. Do you have her federal transcript?
I do, Your Honor.
Is that accurate, what she testified to?
Well, for tax year 2017, let's see. For tax year 2017, she failed to file a federal tax return, notwithstanding having received $76,000 wage income from Sutter Bay Hospitals, $540 wage income from another employer, and a taxable distribution of $5,500 from her retirement plan. In 2018, the account transcript shows she filed a federal return in which she reported no taxable income and no tax. She failed to report over $80,000 wages from her employer, Sutter Bay Hospitals, and a taxable distribution from her retirement plan of over $3,800. My source for that is the account transcript and the wage and income transcript for that year. For
Mhm.
2019, the account transcript shows she filed a federal return in which she reported no taxable income and no tax. She failed to report $66,000 wages from her employer, Sutter Bay Hospitals, and a taxable distribution from her retirement plan of $3,800. My source for that is the account transcript and the wage and income transcript for that year. Finally, for 2020, she filed a federal return in which she reported only unemployment compensation, but failed to report $89,000 in wage income from her employer, Sutter Bay Hospitals. And my source for that is the account transcript, the wage and income transcript, and also the tax return transcript for that year. Since tax return transcripts only go back to 4 years, I don't have those for 2019, 18, or 17.
Okay, so from what you see there, she did not file for 2018, 2019, 2020 for the Fed. She did file 2017.
No, that's not correct. She did not file a 2017 return, but she did file 2018, 2019, and 2020 returns.
Okay.
Mm.
Oh. Okay.
I would just comment that the IRS and FTB are two separate agencies, and whatever the IRS did is not relevant to whatever the FTB did, unless there had been some federal changes, and there were no federal changes.
Okay. Okay, so those are my questions. My colleagues don't have any
Your Honor,
questions. Yes, Ms.
I'd like
Williams?
to make a comment. I
Go
did
ahead.
file a tax return for IRS Federal 2017,
Okay.
and they did accept, the IRS did accept all of my tax years 2017 through 2020
Okay.
with no penalties imposed.
Okay. And they granted your refund claims, obviously?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Well, Mr.
Judge,
Brown,
that-
you have
that
something
is
to
not
add?
what the 2017 transcript indicates.
I understand. You're saying that there was no return according to the transcript, and Ms.
That's
Williams disagrees with that. I understand the difference in testimonies. Okay. Well, that's all we have for today. I thank everybody for appearing for this hearing. We will close the record and submit the case for a decision. We will endeavor to issue a decision within 100 days of today. And I thank everybody again, and everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.